Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be replacing a leaking water pump off my neighbor's 2017 Ford Explorer. This Explorer has the 2.3 liter motor in it. Let me show you what I'm getting into here. So I've got the plastic cover off of it already. This 2.3 liter 4-cylinder engine has a water pump that's located just above the alternator. Let's see if I can point to it. Right there. That guy. 3 bolts that hold on the pulley. We're going to pull those off while we're holding the pulley. We're going to pull the belt off of it, and then we're going to pull the 3 bolts that hold the water pump, pull them off. Now you may already hear me draining the coolant out of it. I like to do that first because it takes a little while for it to drain, and I like to drain it without making a big mess. So to drain the coolant off of these, if you go on the passenger side here, you have to pull this tray off, and they're just little hand screws. And then you see that red knob right there. You just twist that knob and the coolant comes out of there. It drains kind of slow. You can pull that knob all the way out and it'll drain a lot faster, but then you make a big mess too. So I like to just drain it this way while I'm taking everything off, and then if it comes down to it and I still don't have everything drained out, then I'll do that. But this is a little neater. Also, when you're draining the coolant, you pull this is radiator cap, pressure cap. Pull that off of here so that way it's vented. Otherwise it'll do a little Coke bottle effect. It won't drain out fast. So you pull this off and it'll have a constant flow coming out of the bottom there. All right, first things first, we're gonna pull the belt off using a 9/16 socket. On what I'm using is a swivel head ratchet here. You can use a wrench, you can use a regular ratchet, it really doesn't matter. I like the swivel head because I can get around this pipe right here. We're gonna put it on this hexed piece that comes off the tensioner right here, and then turn it and then pull the belt off. There we go. This is the old water pump. This is the new water pump. This is a Murray water pump that my neighbor picked up from O'Reilly's. I'm not sure what they paid for it. I don't have the receipts. I just told them to give me the parts and I'd do the job. So first thing you'll notice, the difference between these two are the vanes. The old water pump here has plastic vanes and the new one has metal vanes. This is pretty standard anymore with the plastic vanes. Not in itself bad, but they typically last quite a while. Metal vanes, a lot of people prefer them. Really, it's to each his own. What typically happens is the water will leak out, the coolant will leak out through the shaft, and it'll come out here where the seal's at. And as the vehicle is driving, this will spin and fling water everywhere. So you may not see a leak while the vehicle's sitting on the ground, not driving anywhere. But while it's driving, you'll see splatter all over the front of the engine. So, and you can tell a difference when you spin it. This one is not smooth, and you can feel it kind of, I don't know, rough, grindy almost. whereas the new one is nice and smooth and steady. So this was definitely a bad part. So what I like to do when I get new water pumps and O-rings is I like to lubricate the O-ring before installing them. It just helps it install into the engine better. If you put these on dry, sometimes the O-rings will like roll a little bit and you could damage the O-ring on installation and it cause a leak, and then you have to do the project all over again. So you can use silicone lubricant. I just have Lubriprate. This is like a assembly lube for like engines and stuff. This works just fine. So you just squeeze a little bit on the O-ring, oops, plenty, and just lubricate the whole thing, and then slowly roll it without damaging it onto the water pump groove. Like so, and just kind of coat the whole thing. And that's pretty much it. This thing, you don't need silicone, you don't need another gasket, anything like that. All you're going to do by doing that is piss off the next guy that has to pull this thing off. So the O-ring, Ford manufactured it that way, leave it that way. Okay, once the water pump's in and both the belts are on, then we can go ahead and fill this up with coolant. Make sure you've closed the drain at the bottom, so that way it doesn't just all go out through the bottom. So what I'm using here is what Ford recommends. It's 50-50 mix, pre-diluted Dex Cool. Or a Dex Cool comparable is really what they call for. This is kind of like the orange coolant, I guess, if you guys want to go by the color. And we're just going to fill this thing up until full. And then we're going to run the engine, we're going to burp the system, make sure the heater works, make sure the thermostat opens, and all that before we give the car back to the neighbor. It's important that you get all the air pockets out, make sure that the water pump's doing its job before you give it back, because if you don't get the air pockets out, then the water pump could cavitate and then the engine could overheat. So it's important that you make all those checks. Double check, make sure the thermostat's opening, make sure the upper and lower radiator hoses are getting warm. That tells you that the coolant is flowing. And then take it for a drive, make sure there's no leaks, and you'll be good to go. Okay, real quick with the belt routing, I'm just gonna shove the camera in here so you guys can see it. It might be upside down, but all right, so first things first, you're gonna wrap it around the crank pulley, the bottom down there. Make sure you go to the rib that's closest, the part of the pulley is closest to the engine, so the inside pulley, then flat part against this tensioner, and then flat part against the water pump here, and then over on this side you've got the alternator. So it's got, that belt goes around the crank, the alternator, water pump, tensioner, or excuse me, idler, that's the idler pulley, and then the tensioner up here at the top. And my camera work is horrible because there's not much space. Alright, after you get it started up, we're going to be watching the coolant level. You see it bubbling right there, that means the water pump's flowing. Then we're going to check belt routing, make sure all the belts are staying on where you put them. You'll let it run for a while, checking for leaks. You're going to be paying attention to the bottom of the water pump there. Make sure you don't see anything splattering. Make sure nothing's dripping down. You're going to have some water dripping, unless you take air and blow it out, you may have some drips from residual water from when you drained it. But keep an eye on that as you're going. So we're going to let this thing run for a while, let it heat up, and then check everything, make sure everything's working out. So the ideal way to fill these is with a vacuum draw system. I don't have one of those. However, what you can do, these engines are a little bit unique. These EcoBoost 2.3 liters have a reverse coolant system. What that means is that it flows in the reverse as typical, and also the heater core is mounted a little bit higher than typical also. So what happens is all the air gets trapped up in that heater core when you're refilling the system. So what you can do if you don't have a vacuum bleeder like me, when you first initially fill the coolant up, fill it up higher than the level, start it up and run it to about 3,000 RPMs for about a minute, shut it off, and come back over here and watch the water level drop down, and then refill it with coolant, and do that a few times over. Let it warm up, keep doing it again, recycle it, rev it up 3,000, let it sit there for about 30 seconds or so, and then you don't even have to do that, let it sit there for like 10-20 seconds actually, and then just repeat that cycle until you've put back in a sort of close to what you pulled out of it when you initially drained it. So, and repeat that process. Watch the temperature gauge, make sure the temperature isn't getting too hot, and then keep going until you're comfortable with it, and then take it for a drive and then double check. All right guys, that's gonna do it. That was replacing the water pump and refilling the coolant, replacing the belts on a 2.3 liter EcoBoost Ford Explorer 2017. If you guys like what I do on this channel, please consider subscribing, and also every once in a while maybe hit that like button. All right, see you guys in the next one.